Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take that absolute fire hose of information, all the articles, the research, the critical takes, and we distill it down for you into the pure, concentrated knowledge you actually need to be informed. And today, wow, we are strapping in for a high-voltage analysis of a global phenomenon, strangers.
Yeah, this is a really deep dive into the shadows of Hawkins, Indiana, and maybe more importantly, the shadows cast by the finale. The source materials we have here, they don't just, offer fan...
No, not at all.
They pull back the curtain on the chaotic, the messy, and frankly, the expensive reality of high-stakes television production.
Right.
We're analyzing a whole stack of evidence suggesting that the final season was rushed, it was incomplete, and that it just fundamentally failed to deliver on years and years of narrative setup.
Okay, let's just unpack this right away.
Yeah.
Because for you out there, the listener who feels like something was just missing, what was supposed to be the mother of all endings, this deep dive is your shortcut to understanding the why. Our mission is to explain how a show this massive, this culturally significant, could potentially stumble right at the finish. And we have to start with the shock revelation.
We do.
I mean, this one detail is so damning, it really changes how you view the entire production.
It absolutely does. The central nugget of information here is almost unbelievable for a show that represents hundreds of millions of dollars and years of global attention?
Right.
Sources cite a clip from a documentary where someone actually working on the set admits that the Duffer Brothers reportedly did not have the ending completely figured out.
Even as they were filming.
Even as they were filming the final episodes.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
We are not talking about tweaking a line of dialogue here and there.
No.
The specific quote from the source material is from someone on the production side saying, clear as day, quote, "Today's a very interesting day. We are shooting episode 8, which isn't completely written yet. Spoiler alert, so we don't even fully know what's going on."
Imagine the logistical nightmare that one statement implies. You are executing the grand, cataclysmic finale of a cultural phenomenon. A show that is built on deep mythology, on massive CGI integration, on precise character coordination, and the roadmap for the climax hasn't even been finalized while the cameras are...
It's staggering.
This reveals a level of pressure, maybe even bordering on creative panic, and it certainly shows a lack of confidence in the established narrative that is extremely rare, even in the churn of TV.
This sounds less like the intentional, carefully plotted structure we expect from these big serialized mysteries.
Yeah.
And more like they were running a marathon and realized at mile 25 they hadn't actually chosen a finish.
And that leads directly to the core analytical question, which is just crucial for understanding this entire critique.
Okay.
What does this level of last-minute on-the-fly writing really reveal about the difference between fan expectation, which, demands carefully plotted payoff and narrative coherence?
Right, they want answers.
And the unavoidable, often messy realities of high-stakes, multi-season franchise production.
Well, fan expectation operates on the assumption that every clue, every strange creature, every psychic link, it's all intentional and it will pay off. But the production reality based on this information seems to be just hit the mandated release deadline.
Yeah.
Regardless of intentionality, coherence, or completeness.
Precisely. And in a medium like this, especially one with a dense mythology built over multiple years, those unanswered questions, that creature lore, the audience sees those as implicit contracts.
Yeah, it's a promise.
It is. And when the creators are forced to admit, even if it's accidentally, that they're figuring out the resolution as they go, it severely undermines the trust that was established throughout the show's entire run.
It makes you wonder what else was just made up on the spot.
It suggests that maybe some of the mysteries were just set up as a hustle, a concept that's often used in the source material to describe showrunners who prioritize setting up their next projects.
The next gig.
Or securing future deals over meticulously finishing the current one.
And that concept of the hustle is the perfect key we need to unlock part 1, which is all about the concrete evidence that this final season was rushed and what external distractions might have pulled the creator's focus away.
We can start by examining the evidence of that rushing, which goes far beyond just an ink script.
Right.
The source material points to visible, tangible errors that a prestige, high-budget production should catch long before the final cut world.
And these are the kinds of details that are just impossible to unsee once they're pointed out. We're talking about visible errors, logistical issues that are basically red flags for a hurried production schedule. The source specifically calls out the costume error involving Holly, where she had the modern Under Armour logo visible on her clothing.
That is just a classic textbook example of a quality control breakdown. I mean, Stranger Things is a period piece. It's highly celebrated for its meticulous 1980s aesthetic.
That's its whole brand.
Exactly. A visible, modern corporate logo on a principal character is an error that should be caught by multiple layers of crew. Costume supervisor, the continuity editor, the color correctors, and certainly in the final edit pass.
So to make it through all of that.
Its presence in the finished product is an unambiguous indicator of a severely rushed final timeline, where that meticulous review phase was just sacrificed to hit.
And if you link that logistical failure to the overall shooting schedule, the source material notes that the physical production, so the actual filming, was reportedly not wrapped up until the end of December.
Right.
Now, for a complex show like this, filled with huge set pieces, massive crowds, and hundreds of CGI shots, wrapping in late December suggests an incredibly tight window for post-production and visual effect.
It creates an almost impossible feedback. If the script is still being written during filming, the production schedule inevitably extends past it,
which pushes everything else back.
That delay then compresses the post-production time, the time needed for music, sound design, color grading, and critically meticulous visual effects. A squeezed post-production window dramatically increases the likelihood of those observed, like the logo just leaking through.
And this is where the conversation gets really critical, because we have to talk about the budget confusion.
Yeah. The money.
The sources observed that the final season looked cheaper than previous seasons, despite allegedly costing significantly more than ever before. This just feels like a massive financial contradiction.
It is.
If the show is bigger, if the costs have ballooned, rumored to be around $30 million per episode, the spectacle should be overwhelming, not diminished.
That observation forces us to confront the question of budget allocation. If that rumored $30 million per episode is accurate, and the visual result is somehow less spectacular, it looks cheaper, as the source claims. Where did that money go?
Right, where is it?
The source material provides some speculation, high salaries for the increasingly famous established stars, massive inflation in overall talent costs.
Someone even suggested money, though that's a stretch.
A big stretch, but the talent costs are the most likely.
So let's focus on that theory. If the salaries for the lead actors and the showrunners just skyrocket, that necessarily means a smaller percentage of the budget is available for the visual components that the audience actually sees on screen.
The sprawling practical effect, the extensive CGI rendering of the upside down, the location permits, the meticulous set design.
All of that gets squeezed.
It's a zero-sum game. You may have the best actors in the world, but if their compensation consumes the bulk of the money, you sacrifice the visual immersion and the scale of the threat. This is where that critique about diminished production quality finds its financial under. They were sacrificing the spectacle for the salary.
And this feeds directly into the overarching theory that the showrunners were, essentially mentally checked out while they were overpromising this legendary finale to the fans.
Yeah.
This whole phenomenon, the creative leadership starting to chase the next big contract before finishing the current one, is what the source material identifies as the external distractions theory.
And the materials are pretty specific about the timeline and the alleged diversion. The source explicitly names a few major professional pursuits: the failed Stephen King project, the massive Paramount deal.
They even mention personal life disruption, the divorce and all that, implying a severe distraction on multiple fronts.
Right. It's a lot happening at once.
So walk us through the psychology here. What is the core argument that links securing the next gig to dropping the ball on the current one?
The core argument is highly cynical, but, perhaps realistic in the world of high-stakes IP. Showrunners are trying to maximize leverage. They want to secure the next gig to have a major Paramount or Netflix deal all lined up, so they aren't forced into a position where they are done and then be like, oh, I have to go find some. They are leveraging the cultural weight of their current success to ensure future financial security.
So instead of being 100% focused on delivering the coherent, conclusive, mother of all finales, they were already thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead, capitalizing on their massive cultural capital. And the inevitable cost is the quality of the product they are currently making.
Exactly. The source material draws a crucial contrast here. It suggests that the first parts of the season felt much more streamlined, more focused, because the creators were still checked in.
Right, they were still present.
As production wore on, and perhaps as those new deals became more central to their focus, the quality dipped, leading to moments where the narrative just felt disjointed or repetitive, or like they were just spinning in circles, going nowhere.
This really mirrors that old critique that's been leveled at someone like J.J. Abrams. The creation of these compelling mysteries without the commitment to actually providing satisfying answers.
Mystery box.
Exactly. The emphasis shifts entirely to the hustle of what's next, and the narrative payoff is sacrificed. And if the creators were operating under this distraction mentality, it explains why they might overlook something as central and foundational as the entire Demogorgon army.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2, the Demogorgon dilemma and fatigue, a section that really encapsulates the most frustrating creative choices identified justified in our soul.
Yeah, this is where we delve into the creative decisions that just seem to defy all internal logic. The showrunners, the Duffer Brothers, they offered an official reason for minimizing the creature presence in the final climactic confrontation. They called it Demogorgon fatigue.
And the response from the source material is, shall we say, unsparing.
I think that's putting it mildly.
It's called the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard, and ridiculously stupid. And the visceral nature of this critique stems from the belief that the creators just fundamentally misunderstood the structural role of their own.
I can totally see why. The argument presented is so solid. The Demogorgons were the main bad, or your minions of the main bad, for the entire show.
They were the original threat.
They were the initial visceral horror. Omitting them in the final battle for the fate of reality actively undermines the entire multi-seasonal war the characters had been fighting.
If the final battle is supposed to represent the entire upside-down ecosystem invading Earth, you need the infantry. You need the shock troops, the monsters that established the initial threat.
Okay.
To sideline the very monsters that broke the boundary and established the danger in the first place in favor of a singular, slow-moving psychic boss, it just feels like a monumental miscalculation.
You know, the source material even suggests that Demogorgon fatigue was likely code for something else.
Like budget, yeah.
Exactly. Because animating hordes of complex creatures is far more expensive and time-consuming than just focusing on a single primary antagonist like Vecna.
And that reframing budget fatigue, disguised as creative fatigue, makes the decision sound commercially motivated, not artistically justified.
Right.
And the evidence of this mindset is so clear in the ideas they threw away. We have specific source details about a truly terrifying, large-scale idea that was scrapped.
Oh, yeah, the scrapped aliens concept.
Yes. The early plan involved the characters encountering a massive field of Demogorgon eggs in the abyss, which is clearly echoing the visceral, claustrophobic horror and scale of James Cameron's.
Wow.
And this addition would have visually reinforced the Mind Flayer's power as the Nexus, showing the sheer reproductive capability and scale of this terrifying ecosystem.
The narrative power of that visual would have been immense. It shows the heroes that the threat isn't just one monster, it's a rapidly multiplying infection. Yet the reason for dropping it was specifically stated as being to avoid demo fatigue and to keep the focus on Vecna and the Mind Flayer. But this choice is fundamentally flawed, isn't it?
It is.
You don't elevate the big boss by shrinking his army. You elevate him by showing the sheer number of forces he commands.
It actively diminishes the scale. And if we connect this omission to the broader picture, the absence of the creatures throws multiple long-running plot points into sharp relief.
Plot points the finale completely failed to address.
Completely. Let's start with their origin story, the slugs.
The legendary slug. For you, the listener, who might have forgotten, you'll recall that in the early seasons, Will Byers was seen coughing up slug, and it was implied that those were the larval stage that eventually grew into the Demodogs and then the Demogorgon.
And the source material asks, very pointedly, what about damn slug?
Right. What happened?
If you establish a life cycle for your central creature mythology, a sort of biological horror, the finale is the precise moment you are expected to acknowledge and resolve that lore.
It's Chekhov's slug.
Exactly. Ignoring the larval stage, ignoring the biological mechanism by which the upside-down propagates, makes the entire ecosystem feel haphazard rather than interconnected and threat. The source explicitly noted that fans deserve to know the life cycle, but the creators simply didn't provide answers because, in the rush, seemed to not even care.
And the scale of the entire upside-down ecosystem is called into question by this omission. The source argues that by the finale, the planet should be crawling with Dema.
It should be.
And it asks why they weren't pulled back up through the established gate, given the connections between dimensions had already been established in previous seasons. If the portals are open and Vecna is the Nexus, why wouldn't he use his entire arsenal?
That is where the lack of Demogorgons critically reduces the stakes of the final encounter. The audience expects a full-scale, catastrophic invasion force using every established creature model. We've already seen the Mind Flayer control bats and demodogs.
So why not Demogorgon?
To not use that massive army in the final moments of a war feels less like a creative choice and more like narrative cowardice or just logistical avoidance.
And finally, we need to address a more subtle but equally important, inconsistent cold climate question. The source material points out that the creatures don't thrive in heat. Henry, when he first became Vecna in the Upside Down in Season 4, was shown wandering through this desolate, cold, almost ice planet landscape.
This is a deep cut, but it's crucial for world building. If the core mythology dictates that the creatures prefer this cold, desolate environment, then the location of the final confrontation should reflect that environmental detail.
Should be cold.
The source questions why the final confrontation location wasn't depicted as an ice or otherwise cold, matching the desolate nature of if the creators were writing on the fly, as they are likely to forget these fundamental subtle rules they established earlier.
And if the rules of the world are being broken just to achieve a convenient plot point, the audience's immersion is immediately shattered.
Absolutely.
Which leads us right to part 3, narrative logic and mistakes, focusing specifically on Vecna's final and remarkably convenient defeat.
We have to analyze what the source material calls Vecna's blind sight, the critical plot hole regarding how the heroes managed to defeat the primary villain.
Okay, so the Duffer Brothers' official explanation was that Vecna was not expecting the sneak attack on his home turf. Never in a million years could even imagine.
So their defense is that their ultimate villain was just caught completely off guard.
Yeah, totally blindsided. But the counter-argument is immediate and, as the source calls it, devastatingly logical. How can Vecna be caught off guard when he is a mind reader?
Isn't he a mind reader? Doesn't he have psychic powers? He connected to Will and he can see where people were.
The core issue is Vecna's established ability. He has telepathic powers that span dimensions, and crucially, he maintained a deep, traumatic psychic connection to Will Byers throughout the series.
A connection that Will could feel and that Vecna could leverage to spy on the group. To claim he was blindsided is a direct contradiction of the power structure the show established.
So to make the sneak attack work, the writers were essentially forced to retcon Vecna's primary relationship with one of the heroes.
Yes. We saw in earlier seasons how Will was used, often against his will, as a literal spy or a psychic conduit. For the finale, the writers basically had to just turn that connection off for the duration of the plan.
For convenience.
Prioritizing a triumphant moment for the heroes over narrative consistency.
You know, the source even suggests a more logical and significantly more terrifying alternative scenario.
What's that?
Vecna should have known their plan because of his connection to Will, leading to an even more intense confrontation, a true the shit hits the fan moment, where the heroes just walk straight into a well-laid trap.
That would have been the pinnacle of high-stakes drama. If Vecna anticipates the attack, the heroes are forced to improvise against superior power and overwhelming odds.
Instead of what we got.
Instead, we got a convenient, momentary blind spot for the ultimate villain, which just deflates the tension. And critically, if Vecna knew they were coming, he would have called for reinforcements.
And the Gorgons.
Reinforcements that were conspicuously absent. He would have used the Demogorgon army he supposedly commanded.
Which brings us right back to the argument that the finale just lacked the necessary epic scale. The source argues the only way to defeat the massive threat, the Demogorgon army and the Mind Flayer Nexus, should have been to create a crucial two-pronged battle scenario.
Let's look at the fantastic analogies that are used in the source material to illustrate. The comparison to Cloverfield is really...
Okay.
The expert notes that in Cloverfield, the smaller, fast-moving, flea-like creatures, so the demodogs in this case, were often more effective and relatable as visceral threats than the giant, slow-moving self.
Right. The smaller things are scarier.
The Mind Flayer is abstract, a slow-looming catastrophe. The Demogorgons are fast, personal, and immediately dead. You need both types of threat active at time.
And the Lord of the Rings analogy is perfect for explaining the necessary structural stake.
It is. If you have a giant, slow-moving central threat, like the Mind Flayer, who acts as Sauron, you need the battle against the massive army to happen simultaneously.
The good guys couldn't beat the armies of Mordor in a fair fight.
No way. Their only path to victory was taking out Sauron's central power source. By the same logic, Stranger Things should have featured the massive Demogorgon army converging on the heroes, forcing them to realize their only path to survival is by taking out the Mind Flayer Vecna neck for the army overwhelmed.
That simultaneous pressure, the ticking clock of the army closing in while the small strike team works on the Nexus, is what creates genuine epic stakes.
It's what makes it feel earned.
Instead, what did we get? The hosts in the source material lamented the final episodes having, and this is a quote, 5 minutes of fighting Vecna and then an hour and a half of feeling.
That pacing critique is devastating to a finale that was billed as the ultimate show. If the conclusion spends 90 minutes on emotional rebel, which is necessary, but not at the expense of,
not at all,
and only 5 minutes on the actual cataclysmic world-ending battle, it suggests the narrative priority line. The external pressure to wrap up character arcs neatly just superseded the necessity of delivering a truly epic...
Let's talk about some specific examples of mistakes suggested by the sources, because it felt like the creators just pulled their punches. The source argued the show should have had key characters injured or even killed, leading to more profound emotional resonance and sacrifice. They specifically mentioned the addition of Dr. K. Linda Hamilton's character, who the source claims was completely wasted.
Wasted potential is so often a side effect of a rush. Dr. K, a new, highly experienced character, could have been a powerful emotional catalyst.
How so?
The source material suggests she could have been killed during the final confrontation. A genuine, high-stakes sacrifice that prompts Eleven further, perhaps even making a sacrificial choice herself.
And that ultimate sacrifice, the possibility of Eleven's death, could have had broader thematic consequences. It could have even changed Dr. K's perspective, making her stop those shitty experiments and find some kind of redemption.
Exactly. The fact that the creators had so many opportunities for genuine sacrifice, for characters to face irreversible loss, and yet they chose a comparatively safe, cleaner ending, it strongly suggests they were being cautious about damaging the...
They didn't want to break their toys.
They wanted the emotional catharsis, closing of the door, but without the genuine pain of saying a permanent goodbye. And when the audience feels that the stakes weren't real, that the writers wouldn't actually kill a core character, the entire narrative payoff. If they were truly writing this on the fly, as the source suggests, they might have simply been unwilling to commit to the definitive, high-cost actions necessary for an epic.
Which brings us to part 4, the aftermath, the after-the-fact excuses and the prequel planning.
Right.
Because once the flaws became apparent and the criticism started rolling in, the explanations came out, and some of those explanations sounded like they were actively trying to rewrite history.
The primary defense offered by the Duffer Brothers that the source analyzes is this claim about a superior earlier version of the finale, the unwritten 3-hour finale.
The exact quote cited in the sources is, "The brothers say there was a 3-hour version of the Stranger Things finale which was never written."
Which was never written.
And the host's interpretation in the source material is deeply cynical. Sounds like after the fact you're trying to make excuses.
It's a very convenient narrative device. Defending a perceived failure by suggesting a masterful, unexecuted version existed only in their...
But the source material highlights the truly damaging part, the Duffer Brothers' internal confusion about this supposed 3-hour version.
Oh, yeah, this was amazing.
When discussing the scrapped Demogorgon egg, one Duffer brother claimed the eggs were intended for the 3-hour version, which was never written. And then the other Duffer brother immediately followed up with, were they going to come out of the eggs? I can't remember.
That internal inconsistency is the smoking gun, isn't it?
It has to be.
If the creators can't even remember the core plot details of the superior version they claim they almost wrote, how believable is that excuse? That lack of clarity strongly supports the idea that the script was indeed being thrown together at the last minute, or that the details were simply never concrete enough.
It just fundamentally undermines their credibility regarding the intentionality of the finished product. But maybe the most cynical, creative decision the source flags is the deferral of key, foundational, unresolved mythological elements to future projects.
That's the magic rock deferral. And for you, the listener, who might need a reminder, critics and fans were asking about a fundamentally upside-down mythology. The question was, what was the rocky touch connected into the mind?
This was the physical point of contact or origin for the Mind Flayer's power, a key detail needed for world-building complete.
And the Duffer Brothers initially tried to just hand-wave it away, suggesting they were going to leave that for the audience, which, as we noted, is pure J.J. Abrams mystery box setting. It prioritizes the feeling of mystery over the satisfaction of resolution.
But the narrative necessity was just too great. And eventually, they admitted the truth. They would explain this fundamental mythological question in a prequel.
And the host's cynical interpretation here just hits the nail on the head. This decision felt like they were simply lining up another project we're getting paid for.
Yep.
They turned a narrative necessity, explaining the core mechanism of the ultimate villain, into a commercial hook for a spin-off. It's a transparent prioritization of franchise monetization over narrative completeness in the main series.
This leads us naturally to the franchise comparisons and creator responsibility section, because the source material contrasts the Stranger Things production with the widely criticized ending of Game of Thrones.
And Game of Thrones is given a surprising amount of critical slack, or a relative pass, according to...
Why is that?
Because the showrunners famously ran out of George R.R. Martin's book. They were forced into a creative void, having to invent an ending for characters they had inherited.
But the Stranger Things finale receives a much harsher critique.
Yeah.
Because it is fundamentally their own creation.
Yes.
They invented the world, the rules, the characters. They had years to plan this out, and yet the source states they couldn't even be bothered to really think it through to deliver the mother of all endings they had promised.
When you are the originator of the intellectual property, you own the total responsibility for its conclusion, and the confluence of rushing the script while filming, skipping crucial creature battles due to alleged fatigue, and actively deferring major plot points to future prequel. It suggests a level of creative negligence that transcends simply running out of source material.
It really does.
It reinforces the idea that the focus was external on the next final, rather than internal on narrative coherence and providing definitive answers.
It's the difference between being forced to improvise because the map ended and failing to draw a map in the first place because you were distracted by setting up your next venture.
Precisely. And that dynamic inevitably leads to a clash between the stated artistic intent and the observable financial reality.
So let's move to part 5. Where we examine this explicit clash. The Duffer Brothers stated thematic intent for the ending versus the financial reality of franchise monetization. It's the classic struggle of art versus comp.
The Duffer Brothers offered a specific thematic interpretation of the finale, which was designed to appeal to the emotional core of the audience. They summarized the entire series as fundamentally a coming-of-age.
And the symbolism they point to is Mike closing the basement door is meant to signify closing the door on his childhood, moving past the horror and stepping into adulthood. They even made a deliberate decision to adjust the closing credit to signify that the story is finite for the core Hawkins, Mike, Eleven, Joyce, and Hopper.
And that narrative intent is genuinely powerful. If the series is truly about these specific characters maturing beyond the horror and moving into the real world, the ending should prioritize that emotional closure. They want the audience to feel that this is the definitive conclusion of their shared journey.
But that thematic desire for finality is completely contradicted by the external financial realities and the very actions like deferring the magic rock to a prequel that the source material criticized.
Right. While the Duffer Brothers publicly state there is no plan or intention to tell the story beyond this immediate arc, Nerdist's observation perfectly encapsulates the audience's skepticism, and I think it's worth it. The audience has likely seen the last of the Hawkins crew, at least until everyone involved wants more money.
That single sentence cuts right through the thematic posturing and lands squarely on the commercial reality.
It does.
It acknowledges that the emotional conclusion, like closing that door, is inherently provisional and subject to the inevitable financial motivation to reopen it via future spin-offs or sequels.
And the underlying critique is that the main narrative suffered precisely because the creators were too busy chasing other deals, resulting in a non-epic finish that protected the IP for a potential.
So if the finale truly was finite, they would have been forced to commit to those high stakes.
Exactly. Killing 11, killing Dr. K, delivering the full Demogorgon army battle. The fact that the season felt softer with that disproportionate focus on feelings over fighting reinforces the idea that they were preserving the characters and the IP.
Right.
This makes the coming-of-age theme feel like an artistic justification for what was really a commercially cautious.
So what does this all mean for the informed listener? As we close out this deep dive, we had to synthesize this unavoidable conflict between artistic intent and logistical reality.
The final synthesis, Stranger Things, was billed as the mother of all end, designed to pay off years of lore and emotion. Yet, the evidence suggests that production pressure, specifically the pursuit of lucrative future deals and controversial creative decisions, like using Demogorgon fatigue as an excuse, led to an ending that felt structurally incomplete, logically inconsistent, and actively rushed.
And the key takeaway for you, the listener, when assessing any major franchise is to look for that disconnect. When you look at a massive cultural event like this, examine the gap between the creator's stated creative vision, which is usually high-minded, like the coming-of-age theme or narrative finality,
right,
and the logistical and financial reality. The desperate rush to finish the script, the failure to commit to genuine sacrifice, and the deferral of core answers to future projects.
Because that gap between what they said they were making and what they logistically executed is often the definitive explanation for narrative shortcomings. If the creators were truly checked in, if their focus was entirely internal, the costume errors wouldn't happen, the script wouldn't be half-written, and Vecna wouldn't be miraculously blindsided by a simple sneak attack.
All the symptoms we talked about.
The problems we analyzed are symptoms of a leadership team whose focus was, tragically, pointed toward the future rather than anchored in the present.
This has been a truly eye-opening, if slightly infuriating, deep dive into the compromises and challenges faced by even the most successful showrunners in the history of streaming television.
And I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over. If the creators of a massive, beloved franchise publicly admit, even indirectly, that they didn't know the definitive ending while they were filming the final episodes, does that fundamentally change how we evaluate the quality and the sincerity of the entire journey? When does creative flexibility, the necessary ability to tweak a script on set, turn into creative negligence?
Right, where's the line?
The failure to finish the foundational script before you even begin shooting the conclusion. It's a question that really goes to the heart of storytelling accountability in this high-pressure, financially driven streaming.
Food for thought indeed. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.